Steve, how are you?
I'm terrific. Good to be with you, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this conversation we're about to have because I'll just kind of set the table a little bit, just going to reiterate some of the things we're just chatting about, and then I'll let you get your background in. We can dive right in. So
Sure.
I was saying to you that, so many times the people that either go through our training and that are listening in and they're kind of bought into this, okay, I'm going to grow value with the end in mind. And then I'm going to build a plan with the financials. I got a strategic plan. And then there's this gap of like, okay, what team's going to implement this? Like, to truly get rid of my anxiety or to make this business more manageable in my life, there's this executive team that needs to be put into place, and I need the rock stars. And there's so many different technicals that we can dive into from that topic. But when I met you, your model and what you're doing is very interesting because of the challenges that come with hiring those kind of people and how to make it work and successful over time. So that's just kind of the groundwork, that just how you and I started talking. But why don't you give everybody the background of you, your experience, and then how you started doing what you're doing today?
Sure, be happy to. So for much of my corporate career, I was a marketing executive in global organizations. So in 1995, I moved to Minnesota to join Pillsbury, and I had been with Pillsbury's parent company prior to that, and worked at Pillsbury, was the head of marketing for Pillsbury International, ran Pillsbury's cake mix business, ran Haagen-Dazs for Pillsbury. Pillsbury formed a joint venture with Nestle in the ice cream business. I became the chief marketing officer of that. I had the pleasure of commuting from Minnesota to California for about 2.5 years doing that. Well, that's a story we can talk about at some point. And then I was later the chief marketing officer for Amation, a publicly traded company, which was a spinoff of 3M in the digital storage media space. So where a lot of my career was in consumer goods, I then had this right turn into technology, if you will. In the middle of the recession, I was taking a look at the business we had at Amation. It was not in terrific shape. I wasn't really wired to manage a decline, and I put myself at the top of the furniture that was being burned and went off and started doing some consulting. And my consulting was in marketing training, kind of basically taking a sales training approach for marketers, and also brand strategy and helping companies, once they had developed the idea of what the relationship they wanted to have with their customers was, how do they get that done internally? How do they use their sales force and their customer service and their tech support to be able to accomplish that? Well, everything I was doing had me standing up in front of a couple dozen people, facilitating or training. My knees are over 60 years old. So if I can make a living sitting on my tail instead of standing up in front of people, I was happy to do that. And besides having a joy on building brands, the other thing that's a passion for me has been helping people with their careers. So maybe it's because I'm decent at it, maybe it's because I'm old, but I can count over 50 people who used to work for me who've gone on to be vice presidents or presidents of companies.
Super cool.
So I thought about how I could do something there, and that led me to founding a business that's called Executive Springboard. And the notion behind it, and I hope we'll have some time to dive into some of this. Organizations basically have, when they have people in new roles, it's high risk. Senior executives who are joining companies, about 50% of them will fail in the first 18 months. And that costs companies a boatload of money when that happens. It's multiple times their salary. So companies are facing a high risk, and the costs of that risk are high at the same time. So I've spent a lot of effort understanding why executives fail in new roles and looking at steps that can be taken to address that. And the headline is, we've created a business that combines mentoring with onboarding to help executives excel in new roles.
You just laid some awesome groundwork for us. So I want to unpack those two stats that you gave, because I think that, I've seen stats like that roll around, but none that are like, okay, literally 50% of executives fail in the first year and it's 1 to 2 times salary. Where does that come? Like, what's the failure reasoning, and why is it so expensive when the failure happens?
Well, let me answer the second question first. Why is it so expensive? let's start with the fact that you're throwing away perhaps, a salary for a year and benefits and everything else because that person doesn't last. So I'm going to include that as part of the cost, right? The failed compensation. Then you have perhaps a search bringing somebody in, the search for the next person afterwards, anything that's happened to the business. Think about people who may have left because of the disruption that was caused, et cetera. And you can see it's more than 2 times salary. It's the hard costs are probably closer to 3 times salary when you add in even a package as somebody leaves, and then getting the next person up to speed. So it is multiple times salary that you're looking at. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe over $1 million in cost from one bad hire. And it happens all the time. It's a coin flip, whether a lot of these folks are going to last or not. So as to why that happens, well, it depends a bit on who you ask. If you ask the executive who has flamed out.
Yeah, it's not their fault, is it?
Right? Well, what they'll tell you is there was something in the environment that maybe they didn't handle as well as they could. Right? Maybe it was the culture that was a little bit difficult for them. Maybe they weren't getting the political air cover from their boss that they needed. It's lots of times it's something in that. If you ask the hiring manager, they'll blame it on the executive. It can't be their company, right? It's got to be the executive. And the top things that have come up, Leadership IQ did a study on this. And they asked people what was their top reason why somebody didn't make it. At the top of the list was not being coachable. At the top of the list was an executive who just didn't listen to feedback or act on the feedback that they were given. Next up is emotional intelligence. Does somebody understand how they themselves are thinking and how other people are thinking and act in ways that will address that? The third is motivation. Is somebody acting in a way that people see they are motivated and committed to getting better at what they do and excelling in their role and understanding their place in that company. Personality issues might be another thing. And I kind of think when a company talks about personality issues, that's probably the other side of the coin from that executive saying that there are cultural issues. Maybe their personality just didn't fit into that culture.
Yeah, it might not be a default or defect. It's just a mismatch.
Exactly. And then fifth, at only around 11% of the time being mentioned is functional competence being an issue. So generally people being hired, right? They're being hired to be, they're people being brought in who can do the job. It's people issues that are getting them, like 90% plus of the time. And that's really the thing that in our business, we're spending a whole lot of time trying to get them to think through, starting from the standpoint of, the job you're supposed to be doing, you understand the function that you've been placed in. How is it that you as a new leader with an agenda for change can get people to embrace that?
So the big question is, how are you helping solve these problems? So when you recognize this, and I don't know, Steve, along your career, like if these were kind of intuitive to you, and then now you got facts behind them, and you got data, and you're building the process. So like, what are the ways of addressing this?
Well, yeah. So how do you come to this first? I guess some of it is data. Some of it is in the process that we have with mentors. It's people showing their scars, right? It's having people who've lived through experiences, some of them where they succeeded, some of them where they may have failed. And honestly, the least painful way for people to learn is from somebody else's mistakes rather than their own. So, what we try to do along the way is help people think through the goals they have to achieve, set up some metrics and strategies along the way to how they're going to get to that, and the mentor will hold that individual to that. But a lot of those goals that we're asking them to set up is, how are you going to work and play well with other people? How is it that you can get alignment with others in the organization around the change that you're trying to bring? Because that's not an easy thing. And if you're new in a company, if you've just been hired from the outside, and it might be a little bit different if you've been promoted in or reassigned, and there some things that are different in that we handle those kinds of situations as well. But when you're coming in from the outside, almost nobody ever says to you, we want you to do exactly what your predecessor did, right? Almost everybody comes in as a leader, has something they're supposed to be doing to change. If you carry that mantle of change too tightly, it's like it can be an excuse for bad behavior. But assuming people aren't acting that way, when you're realizing that you're trying to do things maybe differently than have been done before, when you're new in an organization, you're the one person who doesn't know how anything gets done. You're at the mercy of everybody else in there to be able to buy into what you're trying to do and get them on board and helping you out to get things done. And so that's, as much as anything, that's why it's so important to be building those relationships up, down, and across.
So interesting, because this is so applicable in so many different ways, Steve. Because I mean, I think about it from I've had a ton of private equity firms on the show, and you got, or any kind of business buyer where they're going in there buying a business, and we're just going to quickly do all these things and just rampage and change, and it's like, well, it's everything's based in people at some point. Like, you're going to have to get people, and even if the people listening are looking to hire a CEO or a next level executive bench, it's terrifying, because I went through this so many times, Steve, where there was this one individual that we hired, and it was like there was this story that I was told she didn't fit at all. And I was told that if you put a drop of milk in a gallon of gasoline, nothing happens. But if you put a drop of gasoline in a gallon of milk, the whole thing sours. And the risk is so enormous for an owner, that, especially if you think about, I've got a 5-year plan and this is crucial, and I need to bat this perfectly. I need to hit the home run with this individual. I don't have 18 months and all that costs to get me to where my goal is. So this paralysis is there. How do you address that anxiety of even making this step first?
Well, there's a couple things, and I do have I have a bias that if the answer is inside an organization and somebody has succeeded in that culture, consider them first before you go outside. Because think about a process where you're recruiting for a top position. And lots of organizations may not have this. It may be absolutely clear that they don't have that right person inside. But saying, oh, this person isn't ready yet, let's go outside. Let's think about what has to happen. You go outside, it might take you 5-6 months to find that perfect person. And then they need another 6 months before they get up to speed. So the right comparison may be, can this person inside be there in a year versus me going outside, taking the risk of somebody who's not a good cultural fit, et cetera. So I think that's one thing that I would say first of all is take a look at the resources you have and can you get somebody there? Second thing, where I think a lot of organizations sometimes make mistakes, they have a sink or swim attitude towards these folks, right? They're senior, they're big boys and girls, they should be able to figure it out. And
so true.
It happens all the time. People often are going to people will struggle early on. They need to get their footing. What worked in their last job might not work in the new environment. The problems they face might be different. The culture is different. The people they have to count on are different. They can only make change happen at the speed of acceptance. And so for my business, and this is kind of self-serving on my part, it sure helps to be able to recognize that even this very senior person is work in progress. And it's lonely being at the top of an organization. And they need help. They need somebody that they can have as a sounding board, somebody they can bounce things off of, somebody who's been there before and done that. In larger organizations, maybe not entrepreneurial, but in larger organizations, that's very difficult to have inside. It may be the same thing entrepreneurial, I'm not sure, but what I would say is lots of organizations might have mentors, mentoring programs in place. Even on an informal basis, people take it upon themselves to help more junior folks out. They're great. They're really important to develop people and to retain people. When you get senior enough in an organization, there's nobody to mentor you anymore because you won't make yourself vulnerable with somebody who can end up being the problem. Now, a founder who brings in somebody eventually as their replacement, that may be a good situation for a mentor-mentee relationship. Not always, but that can be something that happens. But in any event, that's a far cry from sink or swim, you know? And those executives make a big mistake too by not allowing themselves to be coachable, by feeling like it's showing weakness to be asking for feedback or, you know, looking for help in places.
Yeah, I think it's extremely applicable for any mid-sized company that's privately held, because you got the business owners have got Vistage and EO and the CEO peer
Yep.
groups, which I am absolutely a huge proponent of. But I also
So am
think
I. Yep.
but there's also challenges where there's sometimes it's the blind leading the blind, because if someone hasn't been through a full cycle, or there's always someone that should be at the next stage that's helping you coach yourself up. But like these executives, the challenge is like you're going to go, trying the same person that's paying your paycheck. You can't be too vulnerable with them because you were hired to kind of fix things or make the change that you said. So explain the mentoring program and or your thoughts on mentorship. So like, what is a good mentor and how does this work in order to effectively use a mentor and being coachable?
So yeah, I see kind of three paths for people in senior levels to have as confidants. Maybe there's more, but I see kind of these three paths. One is something, as you mentioned, like Vistage, peer circles, where people are working with somebody else who's kind of at their level in a non-threatening situation that's not competitive or something like that. And that can be great. I'm not going to knock any of these ways. So I think they all have terrific benefits.
Yep, 100%.
So something like a Vistage or an Allied Executives or something like that is great for a lot of folks. Executive coaches are another way that this gets done. And generally you have people who are certified as executive coaches who have a skill set around organizational development, leadership development. They've gone through a certification process. They are great active listeners, and they can ask a lot of questions to help people start sorting things out for themselves. Mentors bear a lot in common with coaches. One of the big differences between a mentor and a coach is a mentor generally has some shared experience in the field that you're working with. It may be, that mentor is in your company, and you're an up and coming manager, and you've got a vice president of the company as your mentor. That's terrific. When you're in that senior role and there is nobody internally who can mentor you, you've run out of top space there, or it just becomes uncomfortable. Then it may be you find a mentor outside. And in that case, what we've done at Executive Springboard, we have vetted about 90 people as mentors, and we cover about 20 different functional areas, and we've got people in about a dozen different countries. So an executive who is coming into a new situation, whether they've been promoted, whether they've been relocated, reassigned, whatever, hired outside, I'll match them with somebody who has sat in their functional chair and has experience that looks like theirs. So, okay, a new CIO is joining this organization. I'm going to match them with somebody who is or has been a chief information officer. Is this a privately held business? Is this a turnaround situation? Are they coming in from the outside versus inside? All those things are other boxes for me to check. So that executive says, wow, I can see how this person can help me. And he's got credibility that comes with this. We can develop rapport right off the bat. And then from that, they're speaking the same language. And even though I said that the functional competence isn't really an issue that gets in the way too much of people succeeding, that's not why too many people fail. It helps to have somebody who's been there, done that in the situation that you're facing.
100%.
And so, and so that's the kind of thing that we try to do. So while our people have a program that they're trying to take people through over the course of, like, for us, onboarding lasts for 8 months. And I'd love to talk to you a little bit about how onboarding often works in companies. It doesn't normally go for that long, but over an 8-month period, our mentor will be sitting with an executive for 2 sessions, each of 8 months. There's homework assignments, et cetera. So the executive's got a bunch of things that they're thinking about and can be talking about, either as planned or as things come up, and they just need to bounce something off of somebody who can be a sounding board for them.
So yeah, I do want to get to the onboarding and why it's successful and it fails a lot, and how
Yeah.
your 8-month program is a little bit different. Going back to the mentoring though, Steve, I think what I find is super interesting is like, so when you and I chatted prior to this podcast, I was talking about, I interviewed this gentleman, Joel, who was talking about how a CEO can hire the next level executives, even if you're not a functional expert on it.
Right.
And it was super intriguing because he said, well, the executives, their ability to see in the future and their degree of accuracy that they're predicting it is really the functional expertise that they have to have. But like you said, the failure on the personal side of the trust and the culture mismatch, all these issues are the problem. And so many privately held founders, they get to this point. Here's what I see, and this is, I was absolutely victim of doing this. Of, okay, I'm slammed, I'm stressed, I can't do this function anymore. Let's hire Robert Half, hire XYZ consulting company, a recruiting company, plop someone in, and they're just going to take all my headaches away immediately because I don't understand that function.
Right.
And if I hire this person for 150 grand that I'm paying myself, I don't have to train them. So this is why I'm paying 30 grand for the recruiting fee and hiring this person. And then you just assume, like you said, sink or swim. There's this, like, when I realize why that fails is because someone needs to be able to bridge the trust and then be able to have that individual, like that executive saying, hey, here's where you're going, and being able to, because the owner generally can't be that functional coach or mentor because they're the one that's full of all the complexities that the executive was hired to solve.
Right. Well, yeah, and part of your job in that, as that owner, is firing yourself to get that stuff off of your plate to somebody else who can do it better than you can do it. Right.
Yeah. And so,
Yeah.
like, and so when I see, like, it's interesting, and I think this is leading into the onboarding issues that you're talking about, is that this is such a trust related issue, right? Like, we need to trust each other and be able to build the culture to integrate each other into the culture, because that's where trust is the glue behind all of this. And when the owner has these expectations that they might not be able to clearly articulate because they
Right.
know they've got problems, but they don't know how to describe them because it might be finance or IT or sales. And they're going, I just know that these things should be solved. They're just assuming that the functional things are going to, drop in the solutions are going to drop right away. So the trust is getting eroded on the functional side right off the bat when the people side hasn't been addressed yet. And so there's like am I making any sense, or am I
Yeah.
way
No,
off?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, part of this also is in the recruiting process. There's lots of things that can go wrong, and I mean, lots of times, a company, when they don't do it too often, they don't know how to write, position specs. They'll leave it up to the search firm, and that's probably the best thing they can do, is leave it up to the search firm, if they really don't have a whole lot of experience there. The other thing that I'd note is everybody's selling. Both sides are selling through the whole recruiting process, right? That executive's selling, the company is selling. And at some point, we put makeup on the blemishes, and it becomes kind of important for people to be able to understand what's really there. So there aren't too many really uncomfortable surprises once somebody walks in the door. I, I
So
tell
true.
I tell people, when they're going for their final interview, have a 90-day plan written.
Oh,
It will
that's
be
awesome.
it will be wrong. I guarantee you it will be wrong, but it allows the company to see that somebody is looking at their business that granularly, and that they're putting themselves in the role. They don't know enough to get it right. And so, having written that 90-day plan, first few weeks on the job, one of the things to be doing is take a look at that 90-day plan and figure out how much to keep and how much to pitch, because a lot of it might have to get pitched when you see what the reality looks like.
What's interesting about that comment too, Steve, is that, you know, you're so right though. Everybody's selling, and you're almost like, everybody can almost brainwash themselves into this is going to work, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
I've been victim of that many, many times myself in Arcona as well as in our previous business. And I think what's so interesting is one of the interview questions I now have is, tell me a time when you have an idea that you brought to the table and people didn't like it, or that how do you handle conflict? Because you're not in the interview process. Like the only time you're going to be able to see the true colors of someone is when they disagree with you. And you're not going to like adamantly disagree with someone in an interview process.
Right. Yeah. That's a tough thing to have happen. And people, when it comes to it, as important as culture is in all of this, right? Understanding kind of the rules of the road that somebody has to follow, and it's going to be different from where they've been in the past,
Mm-hmm.
right? We don't have a real good language for talking about it. It's really tough, for somebody in an interview process, for instance, to say, so tell me about your culture, and for you to give somebody an answer on that. So I've got, as part of our practice, I'll ask a series of questions in almost like a lightning round of, to try to get at it. Where does the power lie in this organization? How do people like to communicate? I mean, is this a meeting-based thing, or is this an email-based thing? How does that work? How does the immune system get manifested? How do people handle bad news? There's a bunch of things that I want to try to get at, so people have a little bit of an understanding of what they're getting into. But it's one of those things where language, just talking about culture as kind of a thing, it's so darn squishy that that it just makes it really hard for this. But it's critical for people to be getting
success
it
or
right.
failure based on that
Yeah.
culture. And I had this, I think it was that Joel that mentioned it, because I asked him what his definition of culture was, and he said it's the little micro decisions that like ripple throughout your whole organization. He goes, are we a blue jean company or are we pinstripe suits? Like what happens if you're late to meetings? And it's just all that
Yes.
stuff that just it just manifests itself in so many different
Yes.
ways that no matter what executive, they're not going to know all of those things until they get in there.
So yeah, I've heard it defined as how we do things here. And I've just moved from Minnesota to Maryland, and I haven't taken. I imagine I'm going to have to get a Maryland driver's license and look at the driver's manual and all of that stuff for the first time since God was a little girl, right? and in that process, I realized that there is a new tune that I have to dance to. And that's part of what this is about, what's underlying a lot of the things that has to happen. And people are going to dive right into the business issues, as they should. But understanding that context is just critical through all of this. And getting the relationships right, with the peers, with the boss, with the person who works for you, who thought they should get the job, right? Who's passed over
Right.
and pissed off. I mean, getting all those things straight, there's a lot on the plate. Enough for my mentors to stay busy with people over an 8-month period for sure.
So I want to get into the onboarding, and
Yeah.
before we get into the specifics of it, like you mentioned 8 months, and when we had our prep call, it was super funny because you had said that it was 12 months and now it's 8. And you and I were talking about, I mean, it's truly like after 8 months, you have this like trust that what was it? It was a book that I'd read. It was like, it takes about 8 months to build a relationship with someone. You can't expedite that too much more because there's just levels of trust that have to be built in. But so what does a normal onboarding process look like in your decades of experience, and why is your process different, and what problems is it solving?
So research, and I think I've seen this research from Vistage that claimed about how that it was critical. Onboarding by itself was critical, and about 75% of business owners were saying they saw it as a critical component to retention.
Oh wow, that's a lot. Yeah,
it was a high number, and about 75% or higher had onboarding as something that they do. And then the next question is, and how long does your onboarding last? And 53% answered a week or shorter. So now I will tell you that in a week, you've got something done that's different than onboarding. It's compliance.
I was gonna say, yeah, payroll sign up and
that's about it. It's like, okay, this person is here, this person is there. Here's your laptop, go at it, right? So you're right, Ryan. When we started, we didn't know. We set something up at 12 months. We gave clients an opt out after 6. So stick with us for 6. If you feel like it's done or this is a waste of your time or something like that, let's part ways there. We had people who kept signing up. But what was happening was by month 11, the mentor and the mentee were just kind of like looking at each other like, so this is done, isn't it?
so we good, Steve, we good.
Yeah, we realized we overshot. And then so the thought was, okay, do I cut it off at 6 months? No, because what we saw was even at 6 months, there were some uglies that had a habit of still bubbling up to the surface that weren't quite recognized there. And Ryan, I got to tell you, I saw this in my last corporate gig myself. I lasted a little bit over 18 months. And about 6 months after I left, when I could now reflect on a bunch of things, there were situations that had come up. One of the general managers, somebody was responsible for a region of the world, had all sorts of criticisms of one of my people who was located in his market. But instead of giving me the criticism, it went to my boss, the CEO. And it took me like 6 months to realize, kind of what were the politics that were going on there, right? And yeah, because I had other things.
Wait a second, what's going on?
And so, okay, in that respect, it took me 2 years to figure some of that stuff out. But what we've seen is after an 8-month process, people feel like they're in their groove. They've established the relationships, as you said, that are really that critical with either the people who are working for them, or maybe even more importantly, with their colleagues, their peers, who they're working with cross-functionally or across business units or whatever, to establish that. Because what's more important than getting somebody to nail it in the first 90 days is to be able to, for somebody to still be there 2, 3, 10 years later, right? That's what's more important. So while we certainly believe in our process, it probably accelerates people's impact. What is more important and what is a key measure of success for us is how people are, can that be sustained long term?
Well, the stakes are so freaking high when you're trying to figure out like how to hire this CEO or executive team to make your ESOP or private equity sale or family transition work. Like, I mean, the stakes are so high that you don't want to, in the light of like a transaction like that too, Steve, the freaking politics, because everybody sees potential money grab going on. So like the ability to make that work long term is way more important than someone rocking a sales plan 90 days in, or building the budget. And I mean, like you having that alignment long term is so important. How do the mentor and executive relationships help surface those issues, and how do they process them to make sure that dance, right? Because you're probably trying to, like, two people that come together, it takes a while to get in sync, and that's that 8-month period. And so I'm assuming, how are you dealing with those clunky periods, and how does a mentorship work like that?
So one of the things that's really critical is for that executive, the mentee, to realize how confidential this relationship is. So the mentor is making it really clear early on. They have no contact with the employer. Nothing is going back. There's no feedback loop that we have. The employer, we recognize that the company has every right to understand what kind of return they're getting on their investment. The way that happens in the process we use is we'll conduct a one-person SurveyMonkey survey at various times during the engagement. So month 3, month 6, a valedictory thing, month 8. We'll have people talk about what they were getting out of this, how this is working, where room for improvement. So along the way, I'm conducting that with the executive. I'll give the feedback to that, which this is now the executive reporting on how they're seeing everything going. I'll give their feedback to the company. I'll also give it to the mentor so the mentor can make any course corrections they have to make. But the mentor is having no conversations at all with the company. And that's being done because if we can make this confidential, and if the mentor early on is opening up about their own experiences, what worked for them in the past, and more importantly, what didn't work for them, it allows that executive to make themselves vulnerable. And that vulnerability is kind of at the core of all of that. That's why you don't have mentors internally, because people won't make themselves vulnerable with the boss, with a colleague who someday could be their problem, et cetera. So rather, this is something where somebody realizes, I've been given the gift. The company is giving me the tools to succeed. This is, and it's kind of important in this process and one of the reasons why we went with a model that was just a little bit different from coaching. I think lots of times coaches unfairly have a stigma that the work is being remedial. Like if you said to me, hey, Steve, I want to give you an executive coach, I've got a thought bubble of what did I do wrong, right? And that's unfortunate because lots of times people think that coaches are a step in part of the due process before somebody is exited. And we wanted to get as far away from that as we can. So this is somebody who someone can confide in. They're going to hold their feet to the fire on what it is that they put in their 90-day plan. What is it that that 90-day plan is not necessarily all business objectives. It may very well be relationship building at its core, right? But you got to have somebody who's going to hold you accountable, and at the same time be somebody who they can open up to, and that's what we're trying to do in this.
Give us a couple examples of what vulnerable conversations are happening. Like that, what would be examples of the mentor and the mentee and these conversations where they get done and go, that was progress.
Yeah. So where this might happen is when somebody starts getting to the point where they admit they don't know all the answers, right? And are showing anxieties about some of the things that they're facing, and that they've got a mentor who is supportive enough to be able to say, yep, I faced something like this, and here's how I learned from this, because maybe I made this mistake, right? And in that process of being able to open up and share a bit of yourself, and maybe it's not just talking about what happened at work. It might be saying, hey, this kind of stuff spilled over into my personal thing. So here's an example. This happens with some frequency. Somebody is hired, and the job is in Milwaukee, but the person was hired from Dallas, and they're not moving their family from Dallas till Milwaukee till the end of the school year. There are people in the company who are scratching their heads and say, look, they don't think they had good schools here, right?
Yeah, right.
And why can't they? And this is more the before time, pre-COVID, when everybody was like in one place. But there are so many things that can go wrong in a long distance commute, just as an example. And having somebody who's done that before, who can say, hey, Ryan, you know what? If you're going to be doing this and you're spending your weeknights away from home, instead of watching, being able to tell what Law and Order episode it is in the first 5 seconds, why don't you join the Chamber of Commerce where you are? Why don't you do these things in the community that get you linked in? Because if you start doing that, if you're able to do that, then that organization sees you as trying to fit in and belong, and that's a big piece in all of this. At the end of the day, after 8 months, I'm hoping that somebody feels like they belong in the organization, that the organization sees them as fitting in, and they've done that without giving up who they are. They've done that with authenticity.
Ooh, that's so good. Yeah, that's so good. I mean, yeah, and I could think of another example, and I don't know if this comes up with some frequency, but like there's a lot of people that listen in or that are in our trainings that they want to bring in a interim CEO. When I say interim, it's not even interim. It's like the next generation of the family, or they want to build it to the point where the CEO might have some phantom stock or some equity or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And then depending on the family or the partnerships or whatever, like, my God, that's just like setting up for the firing squad because of all the politics around it. And just having someone to be able to say, okay, I got the parents over here, I got the kids over here, I got the previous executives over here. How do I navigate this while also making change? Right?
Yeah.
Like, I can't even imagine how beneficial having a conversation with someone that's been through that. Just one bit of advice could make or break the entire relationship.
Well, and we've seen that. We've had we had something where somebody came in. They were a vice president of operations, and this was a big company, and there had been a hope that maybe they could become the COO. It wasn't going to happen. The person really wasn't ready for that. And the CEO had made the decision to bring in a COO, and had told this vice president of ops that she is now going to have somebody in between her and the CEO. And with the coaching of the mentor, this vice president of ops went into the CEO's office, closed the door. Now, she had a reputation of being rather loud, and the CEO is getting uncomfortable with this. But she said, if this is about me, then we're going to have a different conversation than what I'm expecting, but I know how that one will go too. But let me just assume for a minute that this is all about you trying to reduce the span of the number of reports you have. If that's the case, rather than demoting, in essence, the 500 people who work for me, can I suggest that this person, and this person also report to the COO? Well, the CEO hears this and he's floored because he was expecting an emotional response. He got something that was really well thought out, that he hadn't even considered, and he took it on. So, right there in that one conversation, we earned our pay.
Right.
And that's how these things often do happen. Yeah.
What's just so interesting, Steve, like, I think about, like, when I had the family business and you just only know your own little sandbox.
Right.
There's no relativity. Like, so there's this constant, am I crazy? And then whether it's the owner or the executives that are plopping in, you're constantly going, am I crazy? Because you don't know everything else. But over the last 8 years, with being able to see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies, you go, oh, here are the themes you can extract. Oh, that's normal. So then you have, like, it's just less, you have less anxiety around it. And I don't know how much of what you're doing is just purely helping people communicate, helping people mitigate the highs and lows of the emotions so they can actually focus on the functional stuff that they're trying to do.
That is a lot of it. And, the communication piece is critical. And the communication piece comes in a bunch of different ways. Who are you talking to, right? Can you identify who those key opinion leaders are in your organization? And some of them might be on the org chart and really obvious. There might be others who in an all employees meeting, they cross their arms and roll their eyes, and half of the audience goes away, right? And they may not be where you expect them on an org chart. So understanding who some of these people are, figuring out the what's in it for me, and building the case, doing the pre-sell on people in the organization can be a really important thing. A thought, and we talked a little bit about this on just what's involved in all the change, and particularly when somebody's coming in at the top. I had an executive coach tell me that her practice was in managing grief. And I said, so how do you define grief? And she said, it's the conflicting emotions that come as a result of somebody changing their familiar patterns of behavior. And it stopped me for a minute because there was nothing in it about loss necessarily. It was about change. And she said to me, so, the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief? Yeah. Okay, well, that started off as the Kubler-Ross change curve. And if you think about people managing change as really managing other people's grief, that's a pretty powerful thing.
Interesting.
For people to be able to say, you know what, this person is, I'm going to treat them a little bit differently when they're in denial than when they're bargaining, and it becomes really an important way to try to think about how it is you get alignment at various stages. So yeah, that's part of that communication thing, and helping people come up with strategies that maybe they wouldn't have thought of on their own.
That's awesome. That's super valuable. What would you say to, like, if someone's listening in and they've got an executive and they, before maybe tuning into this, they had the sink or swim mentality because it's very normal. What is their point of no return, or what is the point of leaning in and saying, "Hey, let's give this person a try"? And what is the issue? Or I'd say that's the main question, because I just know that, like, some people wait too long to fire people, and then others fire people too fast, within that sink or swim. So how do you, if you're trying to recalibrate and say, can we resurrect this relationship? How do you view situations like that?
Yeah, I think more often than not, people give up too soon. So I'm, forgive me if I don't give you like a month when it happens, because I'm not exactly sure I
It's month
know
three and
when
a
that
half. No, I'm
is,
just
right?
kidding. No,
Yeah,
it doesn't.
yeah. I do think there's something. There seems to be something that's magic about the first 90 days. I believe that companies drive to a judgment on whether somebody will make it or not based on maybe tactical wins that they have early on, and by 90 days they think they've got it figured out whether somebody's going to make it or not. I don't think the executive has it figured out whether they're going to make it or not
Mm.
for quite a bit longer than that. And I think lots of times it's good counsel for somebody to be quieter, to use the two ears versus the one mouth, right? And be on a listening tour early on before going out and making decrees in your new role. And if that takes some time, and if the organization is saying, boy, she's rather passive, is this what we have? We'll have that conversation and try to figure out if that's kind of an intentional strategy that she's providing. Because I do think way too often we're jumping to a conclusion a little bit earlier than we have, without seeing that somebody has a process in mind, or even that it's just taken them a little bit longer than than perhaps that owner would have expected to grab hold of. But it doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
Do you think that there's certain like a certain example or certain behaviors that, like, once someone does it, you can kind of say that's indicative of everything? And let me give you an example, Steve. Is like, I just,
Mm.
like, there's always like these stories where I'm like, in previous business partners that I've had, or executives, where I'm like, after it all didn't work out, I'm like, God damn it, if I would have just listened to that one story that they told me. It's just like everything came from that. Where, like, like, I'm thinking about this one example years ago for me, that this one gentleman refused to go into the cigar bar to sign this agreement because he didn't like smoking cigars, and, like, was just stomping his feet and, like, refused. And it's like, that rigidness was just translated into every behavior that they had.
That's a great point.
And I
Yeah.
don't know if there's something where, like, even though you're doing this whole, like, in the hopes of making it work long term, but then there's those one things where if you go, that right there, if I listen, it's indicative of everything else. I mean, do you spot those very often, or?
I don't know that if they had there's something that I think happens more on hindsight than it does like in the moment, to say, oh, okay, I see this one. I wonder if that's going to happen. But I do think, and one of the things that we try to coach, if I think about leadership, Kevin Cashman from who's at Korn Ferry had a definition of leadership of authentic self-expression that
You got
adds
his book
value.
right back there.
Okay,
I love
right.
that. I love that guy.
So Kevin, thinking about this authentic self-expression, to me, it's like when you catch somebody in an authentic moment, is that something that works with what your organization
Ooh,
is?
that's good.
Because that might be the tell, right? That person not going into the cigar bar Well, if you're in the cigar business, that would be a there
That'd be
you
a
go, right?
problem.
But to your point about, am I sniffing that there's a rigidity here that is an issue? That's really something to keep in mind. Yeah.
Super interesting that and I like how you pointed out that authentic moment. And you know what's interesting is being in sales almost my whole life is
Hmm.
your goal is always to get someone where they're vulnerable and they can be authentic, and then you actually find those stories. So it's how fast can you get there? I don't know if I was on the podcast or whatever, but someone said to me, actually, yeah, it was JT John Thielen. I don't know if you know him here in town. Anyways,
Oh,
he was anyways, I digress. The point is it was spend, instead of these 90-minute interviews, he was the COO of a company that was hired, and he talked about his experience growing and selling the company. And he said the goal was he spent like 6 hours and multiple times with the owner, because he goes, you can't fake it for more than 2 hours.
right.
So
Yes.
someone's
Yeah.
gonna slip up and you're gonna hear that story that's gonna expose their authenticity and their real true self. And I was like, that's interesting.
So Ryan, I got to say, when we started our practice, we tried to have our sessions 90 minutes long, basically because I didn't think an executive or anybody for that matter could hold their breath that long, right? Something good's got to come out if you're talking to them that long. Well, you know what? It was one of the compromises that I made, was to keep it 60 minutes, because unfortunately that's how calendars work. So rather than having people say, nah, can't do it, we said, okay, let bag it. We're going to do it for 60 minutes and hope we still get good stuff out of it. And so if we're probing enough, if we're asking the good questions, and people buy into what we're trying to do and realize this is all about, our success is built on their success, and that somebody is making an investment in them and in the company to make this work, then good stuff normally happens.
Yeah, you got to get to the point of like, does this work or not work as fast
Yeah.
as possible?
Yeah.
Get to know as soon as possible, so that way you can find the next yes.
Exactly. Exactly.
Steve, this has been a lot of fun. I know we're rounding out to the end here. This has been an absolute blast. So I got two questions that I wrap up with. The first one is, I like to ask people what the word intentional means, because the name of the show, and it's a lot of the philosophies ingrained into our world and what we're all about. What does the word intentional mean to you?
I think it's about having a goal in mind, and not stumbling along. So whether it's building the value of your organization, whether it's getting to a point where an executive feels like they're making the contribution that they should be making in the organization, whatever that is, it's have those objectives in mind and be working towards that.
If people want to find you, your organization, what you're doing, what's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so our website is execspringboard.com, EXEC springboard.com. That'll all sorts of good information there on our mentoring program and how we are helping people, whether it's in onboarding, whether it's in development, whether it's in diversity and inclusion. So all there for you.
Steve, thank you so much for coming on the show. I had a
Ryan, it's
blast.
been a pleasure. Thanks so much.